It's a wonderful day in the homie hood, a wonderful day for a homie. Won't you be my homie to Taro? Today is Monday, March 6th. It's cold in my basement. That's why I'm wearing my toque and the fireplace is on. We are about to dig into the news. We're going to try a new thing today. If you're in the comments, if you could please comment the timestamp of the story that you think is the most important, that would be really appreciated. This over the weekend, it has been. Oops, let me update this really quick. Headlines. Um, Over the weekend, it is has been the 1 year anniversary of Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars, which at the time caused a whole bunch of debate and a whole bunch of, I would say, kind of like toxic debate. So Chris Rock has finally fired back by releasing a Netflix special, and this is according to this article. Just so you know, I haven't watched the Netflix special, but apparently Chris Rock repeatedly refers to Will Smith as a bitch with a mix of fury and glee. And this, I guess, is also interesting because it is a live special, something new that is happening on Netflix where they do like live stand-up comedy. So instead of like filming it and editing it and publishing it that way, it's something that everyone can watch for the first time live. I suppose you can watch it after. And this is probably an effort in for Netflix to increase their growth because they've obviously been struggling, and everyone knows that they're changing the way that they're monetizing their platform. So apparently there are also other jokes about the white panic for the post storming Capitol Hill era, which could be funny, sounds funny to me. However, I was a bit concerned to hear that Rock's material was also about woke culture and social media. I mean, that can be funny as well. Like, let's face it, woke culture, which I consider myself a part of, can be very cringe and funny at times. But and certainly I make fun of it to a certain extent. But I was really sad to hear that Rock also dipped his toe into some problematic trans humor without going as hard as others in his cohort like Dave Chappelle and Ricky Gervais, because he was saving, according to this article, all of his toxic energy for the end. So they're saying here that misogynar, which is misogyny against black women, polluted his final section on Will Smith. So many men, particularly from the hip hop community, aggressively chafe against a black woman cheating on her husband and keeping her head up high while openly speaking on it. However, this article points out the hypocrisy that they would never give that treatment, for example, to Jay-Z when it was revealed that he cheated on Beyonce. And I definitely agree with that. There's definitely a double standard there, and it's something that we need to reconcile with. Things like, obviously this is a opinion about this live special, and I haven't seen it, but I think it is either important to watch the source material for yourself because some people find certain jokes problematic, whereas in my personal experience, I've had to engage with the material myself to think about whether it's actually problematic or not. Everyone kind of has a different line. So sometimes comedians cross that line, and I agree they should be criticized for that. But sometimes I think there is some fair game, and you can make jokes about trans people without being transphobic. That exists. However, I'm pretty skeptical of that happening in this case. So in other news, this is something we covered last week. The BC firm who had announced that they were legalizing the production and sale of cocaine has walked back its comments, and they've drawn this. According to this, they've drawn Trudeau's ire, which is, I don't know. I think that's being a little giving Trudeau actually a little too much credit here. So Adastra Labs, which was the company in question here, issued a clarification Friday that said the Langley, BC company is not currently undertaking any activities with cocaine, and its amended Controlled Drug and Substances Dealers license does not permit the firm to sell cocaine to the general public. So basically, the article that we read on Friday was a bit of sensationalized news, I guess you could say. Health Canada approved Adastra Labs license amendment to allow the production, sale, and distribution of cocaine on February 17th under the license. under the license, Adastra cannot produce more than 250 grams of cocaine in 2023. So, if you are out there and you are a drug dealer, you might know that 250 grams of cocaine is probably not a lot. You couldn't make an entire industry out of only 250 grams of cocaine. I assume. I've never personally dealt cocaine, but I'm assuming that that would not be enough. Trudeau said Adastra did not have permission to sell cocaine on the open market, while Health Canada said the firm could only sell to other license holders. So I don't know. That is a bit weird. Like, it's basically saying that it's a firm that could only sell to other firms. So there's a bit of confusion going on here. Health Canada has contacted the company to reiterate the very narrow parameters of their license. It says regarding Adastra Labs, if the strict requirements are not being followed, Health Canada will not hesitate to take action, which may include revoking the license. Meanwhile, a second BC company says it is now also licensed to produce, sell, and distribute cocaine, as well as opium and MDMA, also known as ecstasy. So this is also a shocking development that there's actually another company now who, in addition to cocaine, has a license to sell opium, MDMA, and I don't know. That is also kind of strange, right? Or I guess it's interesting to hear it. Victoria Sunshine Earth Labs, a biosciences firm that aims to bring safer supply of drugs to the global market, said in a news release it obtained an amended controlled drug and substances dealer's license to include MDMA and cocaine last year. It said it received an amendment to possess, produce, sell, and distribute opium and morphine in January. So this is interesting. And, it's all part of this new conversation in British Columbia about safe supply, which I think is really important. It's just weird how it's manifesting. And I want to make sure that when I'm covering this, like, I'm not also adding to the stigma, because I realized on Friday that, I kind of do have a negative stigma towards cocaine because it is one of those drugs where I've seen people on it and, I didn't have the best impression of them. So I would like to also walk back maybe how I acted on the last time I reported this. And there is some legitimate criticism, I think, to be had, because when we think about safe supply, we don't really think about companies profiting off of cocaine as well. So what we do want to address is specifically the opioid crisis that is happening. So for example, here, while this notion may be difficult for some to accept, perhaps like myself, it represents a rational next step, which means decriminalization may not be enough. An opportunity to purchase certified drugs with known levels of purity and quantity is a way to prevent deaths. And yes, I do agree with that. Safe supply drug policy advocates, however, said Health Canada's decision to issue cocaine-related licenses to private companies does little to address the actual issues on the streets. And yeah, I guess that is maybe kind of why I had a bit of a knee-jerk reaction as well. This didn't strike me as something that was oh, we're helping with the drug crisis. This to me feels like something where it's oh, companies want to benefit from these new loopholes that are kind of being created. Yeah, and they don't want to necessarily solve the opioid crisis, but they might want to make a whole bunch of money selling cocaine legally. That is my kind of skepticism. So Adastra Holdings Limited saw its share price on the Canadian Stock Exchange rise from 0.85 on Thursday morning to $1.33 at closing Friday, a 56.5% increase. And that was based on this kind of sensationalized news that they had this new license to sell cocaine. So, that doesn't necessarily mean that is a bad thing that their stock increased. It is just maybe something to be aware of. For example, if magic mushrooms were to be legalized, I would kind of be happy to see that maybe their stock had risen and it was becoming more of a mainstream thing. So we all have stigma, I think, along these lines, including myself. And I think it's important as these news stories become more and more common that we address that externalized or internalized stigma that we may have. In other news, conservation group hails a historic deal to protect ocean life. So this is a potentially interesting story, breaking ground on a new kind of like world agreement that will allow different countries to um, have a legally binding mechanism for conserving species and ecosystems in international waters and managing activities that could negatively affect ocean life. It will allow for the setting up of marine protected areas that cover large swaths of the high seas, a step that is seen as crucial for achieving the target of protecting 30% of the planet for nature by 2030, as laid out in the framework on global biodiversity that was established last December in Montreal. So this is a kind of small victory here. We don't get a lot of victory stories on the fight against climate change or the fight to protect endangered species. This is potentially a great thing for especially migrating species because you can protect the global ocean at large. Um, Ribert in chat is saying that this is the best story so far because they are a staunch environmentalist. So, other aspects of the treaty, whose final text has yet to be translated and released, include standards for environmental impact assessments of ocean activities and provisions for the fair and equitable use of the ocean's genetic resources. So, significantly, this treaty is the first international agreement that encompasses biodiversity in the deep ocean. Anna Metaxas, an ocean scientist at Dalhousie University in Halifax, notes that one area where the new treaty could come into play involves proposals to stimulate the growth of algae on the open sea to take up carbon from the atmosphere for climate change mitigation. In such a scenario, the carbon would then become residue at the bottom of the ocean. And hey, that kind of sounds like it'll be okay. However, Dr. Metaxas here says that hey, make sure that we're doing the proper evaluations when we're considering new initiatives like this. And Dr. Fuller of Oceans North says it will likely take another 2 or 3 years for most countries to ratify this treaty, but it is definitely a step in the right direction to protect the world's oceans. One thing that this article doesn't mention, which I'm more curious about, is like, what are we doing with all of that giant plastic waste in the middle of the ocean or microplastics in the ocean? That was definitely something that I would be curious about, and we'll probably hear more about this in like years to come. In getting into politics here, we got a couple stories about politics and a story about pharmacare. Ontario Liberals are rewriting rules for the leadership race to give all party members a vote. Now, this may sound like it's like when I read a headline like this, I'm like, what? They don't all get a vote already? That doesn't sound very democratic. And yeah, it's true. Ontario Liberals have voted to scrap their system of delegated leadership conventions. So they have delegates that can just vote, and they don't really have a grassroots voting system where all members vote. But they have, over the weekend when they had their meeting in Hamilton, they have changed that. So I think they're realizing how defunct their party is in Ontario. And they often get ridiculed as being like the minibus party because their amount of MPPs can all fit in a minibus. Delegates voted in favor of changes to the party's constitution that will allow all members to vote directly for their next leader using a ranked ballot system. Which is interesting because like delegates even needed to vote in favor of these changes, which just goes to show how much power they really had. They could have just voted against this and maintained their power, but obviously their party is in such a bad situation that the people in power are like, oh, well, I guess we should maybe change up our strategy a bit. So it's a system that most major political parties in Canada have already adopted. You don't say. Most major political parties already have a democratic system that doesn't involve in just a couple elites deciding on the fate of the entire party. Wow. The Liberals' new leadership vote rules will also weight the results equally by riding in an effort to ensure regional voices are being heard. So if you're curious as to what's going to go on with the Liberal Ontario election, there are a bunch of people considering a bid to run, including Yasser Naqvi, a federal Liberal MP and former Ontario Attorney General under Miss Wynne. Pretty concerning there that he has ties to Kathleen Wynne because everybody remembers that era as like a horrible time, which is why the Liberals are basically so in such dire straits now in Ontario. Nathaniel Erskine Smith, who is also a federal Liberal MP, to me, he is the kind of favorite in the race here. I know that he publicly supports proportional representation of voting, elections reform. So in that sense, we'll see if he maintains that through an election, because he might have to toe the party line. Ted Sue, who's the MPP for Kingston and the Islands, it's great. It's good to see that like this person is already an MPP. For Nathaniel Erskine Smith and Yasser Naqvi, they are MPs. So they would have to, I don't know, transition into provincial politics. I don't really know how that transition would go either. So Ted Sue is at least an MPP for Kingston and the Islands, and Stephanie Bowman is the MPP for Don Valley West, Miss Wynn's old riding. So to me, I don't know much about Ted Sue, but there are some comments down here from Stephanie Bowman. Don Valley East MPP Adil Shamji has not ruled out a run. Neither has Mississauga Mayor Bonnie Crombie, who also attended the weekend meeting. So a lot of, I think, established Liberals are kind of gunning for Mayor Bonnie Crombie to enter the race. Now, this is what I found pretty interesting. Miss Bowman, which is Stephanie Bowman, a former bank executive and rookie MPP, said she hoped to attract moderate Liberals who she said were left behind in last year's more left-leaning campaign. Some moderate voters in her Midtown Toronto riding told her they were puzzled as to why a former banker was running for the Liberals. She said because the platform emphasized social issues rather than economic policies. Now, to me, this is like goes completely against all of my personal political instincts. I think an attempt to essentially appeal to more conservatives is a mistake in our current political climate. But I don't know. Stephanie Bowman has a different political instinct. People were not identifying. They didn't feel at home in the Liberal Party. Those kind of moderates, she said. So very, very strange to me. I'm kind of pretty doubtful of that strategy. I think being a social, I don't know, leftist, I think progressive, I guess is the right word, is definitely going to appeal to more people. The problem is that the Liberals don't really have like the credibility to run on those issues because people don't trust them. And people barely trust the NDP, which tends to be like the compromise there. So this new voting system will assign 100 points to each riding association across the province and allocate them to candidates based on the proportion of members in each riding who vote for them. Liberal youth associations will also be given 50 points each. So that's how it works. Now, keep in mind that they did try to do a similar vote in 2019. However, delegations shot it down and they went in favor of the one member, one vote. They voted against the one member, one vote proposal and instead chose to kind of like undemocratically prop up Stephen Del Duca, who we all know was basically a failure in that regard. In other news, this time at the federal level, an average of 25 senators skip each legislative vote. A Globe and Mail analysis has found. Honestly, this is from Robert Fife, the Ottawa bureau chief. Today is the first day where they have not run something on the front page that is some super sensationalized idea about China rigging the elections. So this is the first day, and I would say about a week and a half or 2 weeks where we're actually getting something else other than China bad on the front page. So personally, I'm happy to see that we are potentially moving away from this narrative, and we're probably going to look a little more into what's going on with the whole China bad situation, which I think is a nothing burger personally, later on in the stream if you want to join us live. The Senate has sat for 104 days since November 2021, but about 25 senators on average have missed each of the 37 legislative votes over that time, according to an analysis by the Globe and Mail. And several members have cast fewer than 4 of the 19 votes since Parliament resumed sitting in the fall of last year. During the pandemic, the Senate and House of Commons instigated hybrid voting, which concluded in June for senators, but which remains in place for members of the House. So basically, there's a whole bunch of senators who are neglecting their duty. And you might say, oh, well, I know that like the city councilors in my city, they don't get paid very much. And they're working their butts off. But this being part of government should maybe be more of a labor of love. And Absolutely not. I completely disagree with that because that, disenfranchises people. It means people who are only uh in the upper echelons of society are able to fulfill those jobs at city council. However, in these jobs at the Senate, they're getting a what they called a basic $164,500 annual salary and a tax-free housing allowance of up to $26,850. Senators retire at the age of 75 with a pension. So you can just hold on to this position. Apparently, you don't even have to show up and vote. You can just hold on to this position until you're 75. And these are also not democratically elected officials. Senators are appointed by, I believe, the prime minister. The post includes an office, staff, money for research, and general office expenses, free rail and air travel. They get free rail and air travel, and they can't even show up to do their job. A senator is docked $250 a day if they fail to show up, which is nothing. Imagine you're getting paid this much, and they probably have other forms of income as well. Please tell me how many senators are landlords? Probably more than half. But they can claim sick days, or they can or say they are on official Senate business to avoid losing money. Senators are allowed 21 personal days for each parliamentary session. So they don't even have to get docked the 250. They can just say, "Oh, I'm not feeling well today," and not come and participate in our democracy, which is insane. Only 58 senators were present for the final vote February 2nd on Bill C-11, which makes sweeping changes to the Broadcasting Act. So missing the vote on C-11 was Jim Quinn, who sits on the Transport and Communications Committee, which studied the bill. He was on the committee that studied this bill, and he didn't even show up to vote on it. He was in Florida when the final vote took place, which is are you kidding? Another conservative senator, Larry Smith, was in the Barbados. And someone else, Sabi Marwa, was dealing with a family matter in India, which to me is okay, that's kind of a legit excuse. But these other people, these other senators, they're vacationing. It's wild. Senators Smith and Quinn said they booked their holidays before Christmas and didn't expect the Senate to come back until the second week of February. However, this calendar is set on the same schedule as the House of Commons, as if they didn't know what the schedule is. This is wild to me that this is what's going on. Mr. Smith says, "I pre-booked because it was our 50th wedding anniversary." Oh, okay. And then there's a host of other excuses here, many of which are health issues. Which, of course, I've had my own health issues, and I'm sympathetic. But these are our lawmakers. These are people who create the rules of the land, and are responsible for our democracy. So there's someone here citing health issues, more health issues, PTSD. Someone here saying that the Globe's inquiry into why they were missing in action aggravated their PTSD. If questions from journalists aggravate your PTSD, maybe you should just retire. Why are you still a senator? If some basic questions are triggering you, then that's fine. I'm not making fun of anyone for having PTSD, but maybe you shouldn't have this responsibility where you can't show up to do your job, which is to help our nation function. Another person here citing health challenges, another person citing sick leave, and another person grieving over the loss of their husband who fell suddenly ill in the fall. So she's taking multiple seasons to grieve. Now, if you are a working class person, at the very most you get 1 week off of work when your parent or your loved one dies. This person taking seasons, not even months, seasons of time to grieve. Why don't you just retire? Why don't you just if you don't want to do your job, just let somebody fill that position who wants to do it? And lastly, there is someone here saying there are a couple people who have perfect voting records, and one of them is saying it is a privilege to sit on the Senate. It absolutely is. You have to be appointed to the position. So you can see here, Egan Shugart only voted one time. Margot Greenwood 4 times, 6, 6, 8, 8, and it goes on and on here, and there are some with a perfect 37 voting record. So honestly, it is just shocking to see, like, oh wow, you can be appointed to this position and you barely even have to show up to do your job. Lastly, last story of the day. I know we're over time, but that's how Mondays go because we're catching up from all the news over the weekend. BC's universal contraception coverage inspires call for funded birth control across Canada. This is like a fantastic story. I love to hear it. It could be something that kind of penetrates the national thought bubble into universal pharmacare. So British Columbia is going to fund prescription birth control, a first in Canada that reproductive health experts say should prompt the rest of the country to follow suit. Absolutely. The new plan takes effect April 1st and will cover the cost of birth control pills, contraceptive injections, intrauterine devices, subdermal implants, and the emergency contraception medication Plan B. The cost is estimated at $119 million over 3 years. And that, I have to say, $119 million over 3 years, that is so cheap. If that's how much it costs, how come we should just have this across the entire country for sure, if it's that cheap? It's a matter of equality, says Megan Doherty, Director of Global Policy and Advocacy with Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights. It's also a matter of equity. Ms. Doherty said that people have the right to determine when or if they get pregnant. Absolutely agree. A choice that requires access to birth control, and they should be able to choose the contraception method that works best for them, not to be forced into a decision based solely on cost. And yes, absolutely, this is exactly what we need, especially when we know that in the United States right now, they are trying to take these healthcare services away from women and put up additional barriers into getting medical treatment or the pharmaceuticals that they need. They're also saying here that IUDs can come with a steep upfront cost, sometimes more than $400. Some women end up opting for cheaper but less effective options, such as birth control pills, which must be taken every day and require frequent prescription refills. So obviously, having birth control pills is not going to be as reliable as having an IUD. We know that when you have to pay for contraception, people make different choices, and it really increases the risk of unplanned pregnancies, said Megan Thumath, a registered nurse in BC who regularly prescribes birth control. Canada trails behind numerous countries subsidizing contraception. In Canada, coverage for birth control depends on where a person lives and whether they have insurance. So obviously, this is something that can create a multiple layered system. And as much as we love to brag about how we're not in the US and we have universal basic healthcare in Canada, we really do not. So this is like a fantastic story to see. I hope this is the first of many forward-thinking steps. If they can do it in Europe and the UK, they can do it in Canada. They can do it Canada-wide. It doesn't make sense to have this two-tiered system with different provinces doing different things, Dr. Dunn says. Douglas Wilson, the president and chief executive officer of the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada, oh my goodness, that's a mouthful, said there are clear benefits to universal access to birth control, including reducing the physical, psychological, and financial consequences of unintended pregnancy. I don't see all the provinces lining up behind them to do the same thing, Dr. Wilson said. We need much more of a national voice for prioritization of important healthcare issues. And absolutely agree. It's so nice to see a story like this. We had a couple victories. We had a couple good news stories in the news today, which can be so rare in this day and age. So thank you so much for tuning in. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Today's question was to comment the story with the timestamp, the story that you liked the most today, the story that you thought was the most important. Put this timestamp in the comments. Thank you so much for tuning in to My Homie Tutaro. We're live every weekday morning to do the news. NT for Squirrel in chat is saying the last story was her fave, and it's hard to disagree. Thanks for tuning in. Peace out.